That's a statement that may be offensive to many Christians. It would certainly be offensive to the worshippers at the Toronto Airport Church, who take their belief in the literal truth of the resurrection of Jesus very seriously indeed.
Well, I hear you singing in the sweet how Jesus is alive. All creation shouts aloud that Jesus is alive.
For these Christians, the risen Christ is an active part of the church, and they believe that in 1994 Jesus blessed their church with a miraculous healing mission.
For 1 minute, in the spirit for 1 minute.
Since then, thousands of churches around the world have claimed to be touched by what became known as the Toronto Blessing.
Glory is coming into the room. Hey, glory is coming.
And in Toronto, in a splendid new church built by contributions from the faithful, the congregation continue to celebrate their belief in the resurrected Christ.
Well, be blessed.
Here, on an almost weekly basis, they claim that their faith has the power to miraculously heal.
So God's going to heal you right now. There it goes, and the neck is healed in Jesus' name. Don't you like it? I like it. Bless you, brother.
Today, it seems to me that there are many people who will strongly defend the literal truth of the resurrection. Many others who are Christians or not Christians believe that perhaps, you know, those who die may be alive in some way, that Jesus who died might be in some sense alive, whatever one means by that. And there are many others who take it as an image of hope, because after all, talking about the resurrection of Jesus has a great deal to do with what we think about life after death, or for that matter, our own prospects.
The problem for the church in the 21st century, in a technological and secular age, is that some people find it hard to believe in the literal truth of the miracles, let alone the miracle of the resurrection.
Since the 18th century, we've lived in a climate where people have distinguished between faith and belief. So the whole effect of science on religion really has been to throw religion back, to prove what we can believe in.
But week in and week out, congregations gather in Christian churches and recite together an ancient creed, from the Latin word credo, meaning I believe.
We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty.
We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty.
For our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate.
At the climax of the creed, all Christians affirm their belief in the resurrection.
On the third day, he rose again, in accordance with the Scriptures.
He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father.
He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead.
But whatever is said in church, many Christian theologians no longer consider the resurrection to be an historical fact. And this has not just been a problem of the 21st century. 1,000 years ago, a group of devout Christians in southern France also held unorthodox, heretical views. In the 11th and 12th centuries, the Cathars, a deeply religious group, believed that all material things were the work of the devil. They saw Jesus as an angel, who certainly could not have been physically crucified, and certainly would not have been resurrected as a physical body. It was actually in response to the Cathar heresy that the Church created the Inquisition. In 1244, the last 200 of the Cathars were rounded up and burned at the stake as heretics. The Church has always reacted strongly against anyone who doubted the truth of the resurrection, because that doubt insinuates that the very literal and physical gospel descriptions of the death and resurrection of Jesus are fabrications. But there is one story, also set in France, at about the same time as the Cathars, which suggests that another Christian group made a discovery which really might reveal that the resurrection story was not true. In the 13th century, this whole area was a stronghold of the Knights Templar, a strict religious and military order of warrior monks. Local historian Thierry Lecon has spent the last 12 years uncovering the history of the Knights Templar in this region. The Templars came to this region. There are traces of them all over the countryside. Down there at the bottom, near Château de Blanchefont, there are ruins of an old Templar command post. The Knights Templar were committed to poverty, chastity, and the protection of pilgrims en route to the Holy Land. But their main purpose was to keep Jerusalem and the holy sites of Christianity free from the forces of Islam. During the years they were in the Holy Land, the Templars built their own castles. But they buried their dead in graveyards they excavated near to the original Temple of Solomon. And certainly, during this time, they were thought to have discovered great treasures. Eventually, the Templars were forced to leave the Holy Land in 1186. They returned to France. Certainly, the Templars remained powerful, rich, and incredibly secretive, so it's not surprising that people speculated about them. And there grew a legend that the Knights Templar had discovered Jesus' bones in Jerusalem, that they had brought them back to France, and they had buried them somewhere near here. The legend that 1,000 years ago the Templars might have found an ossuary box containing Jesus' bones has led modern scholars to a small church in the village of Rennes-le-Château. Writer Richard Andrews is convinced that there are clues here that might reveal what exactly the Templars did find during their excavations in Jerusalem.
One can ask the question, did the Templars find relics, an ossuary full of bones, that they thought were possibly the bones of Jesus? Now, if they had found these, it would have been a shock to the system, because the Templars were good Christians. This would challenge the whole doctrine of resurrection, because here are mortal remains. So we ask the second question, why should the Templars risk being accused of heresy and bringing the bones that they thought were Jesus's back to this area? The answer is simple. If they had found something which they believed were the bones of Christ, they needed a safe location. You could hide a church in these mountains, let alone a small ossuary. You can get lost in these mountains today. Imagine what it was like 1,000 years ago.
In the late 19th century, the local priest here, called Bérenger Saunier, claimed to have found ancient documents. And whatever they were, he certainly became very rich afterwards. Richard Andrews has found clues among these parchments, using elaborate geometry and transferring symbols from ancient paintings onto equally ancient maps, all in the hope of finding a Templar treasure trove.
The clues that we found point to a map in the form of a hexagram, which is also known as the Seal of Solomon, but it is the Star of David. This map points to a specific site. Now we know that the priest, Bérenger Saunier, became fabulously wealthy, but we are sure that he didn't actually find what he was looking for. We can deduce, perhaps, that Saunier received money from patrons to look for a location in the area that might reveal perhaps the bones of Christ. Whatever it is, we do know one thing for sure. The secret that Saunier was giving clues to was heretical.
Saunier died in 1917 and took his secret with him to the grave. That hasn't stopped enthusiasts like Thierry Lecan from continuing to search on the basis of Richard's work and trying to solve the mystery. Using local maps on which the geometric lines from Saunier's original parchments have been transposed, Thierry has found further evidence of the Templars' presence here, and he believes he's closing in on the location where the Templars could have buried the bones of Jesus. There you have the summit of Mount Kadu, and there are two cedars there, about 10 meters distance between them. They form an alignment, traversing the valley of Rennes-les-Reins, arriving at the Plateau des Bruyères, where there's a rock with a cross. I lined up the compass. I took a long time and I made a lot of mistakes, but I was convinced I'd find something, a cedar or another cross. And then I found a cross. There's the famous cross. I spent a long time very near it, but without finding the place. It was a little set back from the plateau. It took me 12 years to find this cross. Even if the Knights Templar did bring Jesus' bones in an ossuary box back here from the Holy Land, it seems unlikely that Thierry Leconte or Richard Andrews would ever find them in these mountains. However, there have been those who've gone back to the original gospel stories of Jesus' death and resurrection and come up with more credible but no less startling conclusions about what exactly happened 2,000 years ago.
You read the story of the empty tomb, and on Friday someone is killed, and on Sunday they're gone from the tomb, and you ask the question, what might have happened? Either God raised him from the dead, which is the traditional Christian affirmation, or the body was carried away by someone, body stolen.
But there is another possibility. The Gospels describe how, after his resurrection, Jesus ate, drank, and Thomas could touch his wounds. It's therefore perhaps not surprising that some people who've looked for natural explanations of miracles have suggested that Jesus was alive because he didn't die on the cross.
There are many versions of that story. One came up in a book years ago called The Passover Plot, which suggested that he had been sedated on the cross, that he was removed quite early, and therefore could well have survived. That's certainly a possibility.
The disciples did manage to give Jesus some kind of substance on a sponge. They filled a sponge with vinegar and put it upon hyssop and put it to his mouth. And Jesus immediately died after taking this substance. When Jesus had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished." But oddly enough, it isn't necessary to suggest that Jesus was sedated or drugged by whatever was on the sponge in order to believe that he could have survived. There are stories of people who did survive crucifixion. The Jewish historian Josephus wrote of one of his own friends surviving crucifixion in Palestine in the 1st century.
He's traveling out to a village named Tekoa to scout land for a Roman camp. And he notices that 3 of his friends are hanging on crosses. So he requests that they be allowed to, that they be brought down. And Titus, the Roman general, gives him permission. The 3 are brought down immediately and given medical care. And 2 of them died, but the 3rd survived.
So is it possible that Jesus survived? Certainly his crucifixion was speedily executed, perhaps too speedily.
When you look at the story of Jesus and how he was executed by the Romans, he's on the cross for 6 hours. The assumption is that he's dead. The Roman soldiers checked the body. There were 2 others crucified according to the gospel accounts. And they broke the legs of those to hasten their death because the Sabbath day was coming. When they came to Jesus, they said he's already dead. Presumably, his body's motionless, he's quit breathing. They then prepare the body and put him in a tomb. And presumably it's sealed up and he's dead for all practical purposes. The question, though, is he clinically dead?